I had this message that came through the other day from somebody I know pretty well. He was reaching out about, when I opened it up, it was like a picture of a supplement. And the supplement was a quote unquote testosterone booster. And it's a plant-based testosterone booster. And the message that came along with it was like, hey, man, what do you know about this supplement? And I go, and will it help me?
Was this the Joe Rogan like Tunga
No. It was, I don't want to get into brands and whatever else, but I know this guy pretty well. Like, and he's a researcher, right? Like, and he is, he's sharp. Like he's going to go and he's going to ask questions before he just does something on a whim based on one person's advice or whatever. And to be clear, I actually know this guy from the firearms, side of what I do. And from that group. And he's highly knowledgeable. Like I go to him. I've gone to him several times for questions specifically on rifle optics and stuff because he's kind of been around the block several times. He nerds out on it. So I'm looking at this thing and I go, the first again, it's like, hey, what do you know about this and is it going to help me? I think I need to raise my testosterone levels. And I go, hold on a second, where did you get this and why are you doing this? Then he tells me, well, I'd gone to a supplement spot. Now, this is also somebody I know and he said this person had recommended this because he'd gone in there and asked about pre-workout because he wasn't feeling energetic when he was walking into his workouts or out of his workouts. So he felt like, man, I need a little pick-me-up. The extra, latte or whatever, a cappuccino that I'm doing isn't getting me what I want. I'm just kind of feeling run down when I'm going into the gym. It's tough to kind of get up, for the workout, so to speak. We didn't get into that. The other getting up, that actually came up later. But
good, at least it came
he goes,
up.
I'm going in. So the guy goes in for a pre-workout and he walks out of there with the testosterone booster. So I'm like, okay, hold on. I go, talk to me. I have about 75 questions before I answer anything from you, like that I'd like to know about before we get there. And here's the thing. I just find it really interesting that, I work with some and work out with and train with some highly skilled, like highly educated, high achievers. Most of them are, because that's who I surround myself with. Like I don't want to be around people that are lazy or complacent or have their hand out. So I'm hanging out with people that are kind of pushing themselves and pushing the envelope all the time. And this particular guy knows a lot about a lot of things. He's a mechanic for very high level shit. Let's just put it that way. And knows his way around things. He knows his way around firearms way better than I do. And so he's at a very high level. And immediately upon feeling like he's behind the curve somehow, he's reaching for a bottle. He's reaching for a powder to push up either his performance from like an amped up, response to, I need to also push up my testosterone. And he's doing that through powders and pills.
Is he trying to get there faster versus taking?
I just think he's just looking for a solution. And there was, what strikes me about this when I have these conversations, I'm like, you're such a high achiever and you have so many things going for you and you've gotten to this point in your life, yet you have no earthly idea how your body works. And again, I'm obviously very biased. I say that all the time. I'm biased because of my background and my experience and the things that I've done in my life. But people coming into this they have zero clue how their body works. And that's okay. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here and trying to help people understand how to make better decisions for themselves so that they don't go down these rabbit holes and reach for things that aren't ultimately going to help them. And maybe they give them a little bit of a boost or whatever that is. Maybe it's just a placebo and that's helpful. Mm-hmm. Hey, whatever.
Maybe it dumps you down the road for worse off.
But, it went from, I need a performance supplement that is in again, the pre-workout to hormones. Now, I've spent a long enough time in this business where I've spent tons of time around hormones. I have my own personal experience with going down the rabbit holes and doing things and taking things, over the years to try to right my own, sort of balance. But there's this thing that really aggravates me, and that is people blaming their hormones for the problem. So I didn't have to ask 75 questions. I only had to ask about 5 to quickly kind of analyze and I guess evaluate that, bro, maybe we need to address your lifestyle here. maybe this is a lifestyle issue. Your hormones are a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found myself trying to educate him on how those hormones work, and the light bulbs were going on. Like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And I didn't know that I should ask that question and whatever else. So that's what I want to do today. I want to kind of high level talk about the hormones that basically are some of what I would consider the most important ones for you to understand as human. You don't have to be an expert at this. I am not. Neither of us here, or none of us here, are doctors or physicians, endocrinologists, anything like that. I don't claim to be. I am not good at going down deep rabbit holes, and I'm going to do my very best to stay inside our lane today, and I encourage you to do the same. But this isn't rocket science, the stuff that we're going to talk about today. And what I think is really important is that people can walk away from this conversation and understand, hey, if there were 4 hormones that I needed to kind of really understand in my life, and that's where we're going to talk about that we have 4, to help me perform better, look better, and live better. And if I could control those from the outside, like the controllable factors that I have in my life to help me do all of those things, I would do that. So that's what I encourage people to do before they start looking for pills and serums and blood testing and all that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at. And so that's what today is. So let's talk about, the first one on my list, and this is the one that I think most people want to talk about when it comes to performance and feeling better, and that is testosterone. And again, that goes back to the supplement, the testosterone booster. Let's just talk about the hormone in and of itself and what it does. I mean, Jeff, you want to tackle that real quick?
Yeah, so I mean, testosterone in males, it does more than just building muscle, right? That's kind of the biggest thing is, men's on testosterone, we're building muscle, right? Mm-hmm. But it affects mood. It regulates a lot of things that when you don't have, you become unhealthy. Like I have my own struggles. When I'm in low T, I'm an asshole, right? I'm not good. I have a lot of brain fog. I just don't feel like I'm working properly. When I'm on my TRT, I feel phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I feel a very good well-being. I know we talked about this the other day.
Physically and emotionally.
Yeah, just it does a lot of balancing for things that can't really.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I think things that people would really relate to really quick is like low libido. If you have low libido, it's highly likely you've got, what we'll call it low testosterone, or maybe we can refer to it as estrogen dominance. And we'll come back to the estrogen thing a little bit later. Also, you find it really hard to lose body fat, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what kind of calorie restriction or how you adjust your exercise, your diet, you just seem to have a really tough time losing body fat. That could be a symptom or a sign of having low testosterone. Testosterone helps you from an anabolic perspective to burn fat, build muscle, and or maintain, if that's what you're trying to do. But you mentioned like the brain fog piece. From a brain function perspective, there are interplays with other hormones. And if your testosterone is low or not being regulated, let's just say it's all over the place, it can impact a lot of things like how your body processes food, how it utilizes carbohydrate, how it utilizes fat, your sleep patterns, things like that. So it's, without getting too far into the rabbit hole, it is your, part of your basic sex characteristics. Men have...
There are 2.
Men have more testosterone than women in general. However, what we found is that it's not necessarily like how much you have, it's how regulated it is. So we can talk a little bit about that. But, as far as the testosterone goes, like it's male sex hormone, right? And it is a steroid, right? So we can define it as that as well. But it's part of a lot of other processes outside of your basic sexual function. But we already talked about some of the symptoms. Like if you're low on testosterone, things that you might feel as a male would be like low libido, increased body fat,
fatigue.
The fatigue. You might have, brain fog would be one of those, sleep disturbances, not being able to get a good night's sleep. One thing to talk about, and you hear this a lot in the bodybuilding world, is like tender breast tissue, like in male breast tissue. We both males and females have it. Gynecomastia, gyno as it's referred to. If you notice the sensitivity around your nipples or around your what would be considered breast tissue, that could be a sign that you have low testosterone. Or again, you have too much estrogen, as the other side of that. We'll get into the estrogen thing in a minute. But it's important to also note that females need testosterone as well. I mean, they have like 5 to 10% of the amount of men in general. That's kind of the general thing. Yeah, of testosterone. Yeah. But if they're low in testosterone, there's also symptoms there. So dudes, and we know there's a lot of you listening because, you know, the majority of our listeners are males, but here's things that your female significant other could be experiencing. And one of those might be aggravated PMS symptoms. Like if those cycles are starting to get like really, really uncomfortable and they're increasing over time, that could be a sign that you have low T or too much estrogen on board. There's not a balance. Erratic, like cycles. Not regular.
Menstrual cycles?
Yeah, menstrual cycles, not regular. Heavy water retention and bloating. Like some of them are like, dude, that's me fucking every time. You know, I hear ladies like, that's me every time. Like, what are you talking about? Low libido as well. If your testosterone is low, you know that sex drive is going to be low. A few other things. Sugar cravings is another one because we're looking to offset hormones in there. Your body just kind of naturally does that. Hypo or hyperthyroid, so some thyroid things can pop up because there's interplay between those hormones. And then the other things, brain fog, mood swings, depression.
Big one.
I want to talk about that one because, you know, as we're going through and people are, you know, experiencing things in life, like they go through stress, right? They changed jobs, they've lost a significant other, they've moved, they've all those like big life-changing events. And with all the stress that people are feeling and their inability to deal with it, or, you know, all the things that are piling on sort of externally, depression is pretty popular. We just talked about it on another podcast as being one of the top 10, basically, well, it's actually the number one reason for disability, depression in the United States. Like it's mind-blowing, right? So it's a big deal. And if you're feeling all these other things that we just kind of mentioned, whether you're a male or a female, fuck, I've been there. You're depressed. Like you feel depressed, but depression is a symptom of other things. The low testosterone or estrogen dominance is also a symptom of other things. You can't just put it all in depression. Jeff, you and I were having a conversation sort of off air about that. You want to talk about that whole depression and medications and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I when we have a lot of men that have depression, I see a lot that are just jumping to the doctor. They get on some antidepressants. Nothing changes, nothing happens, right? Other than the negative side effects from said antidepressants. When really their lifestyle shit, they have low T, they don't even have a number, they haven't gotten blood work, but they're not in the know, right? So what we were talking about is just trying to get males to understand, like, where's my baseline at a younger age? Just getting blood work done throughout your life and understanding that, you know, around age 30, testosterone starts to dip. And we're even seeing it super early now with what's going on with access to porn and a whole bunch of other things that we don't have to get into. But yeah.
So what ends up happening is because you're feeling all these things, doctors are prescribing these SSRIs, and those actually impact testosterone production and can make your situation worse. So you may be depressed, but if you offset your hormonal balance, reset your hormonal balance, would you feel better rather than taking a drug? So it's a misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
We've had Dr. Bob Porzio on the show before, and he's talked about this being a misdiagnosis. It's not depression, it's a hormonal imbalance. And what we're doing is we're just kind of piling one on top of the other. So something to think about if you're out there. This is the same for females. Again, this hormone is important for females as well, and important to understand. So, you know, those are the things you might be feeling if you do have low testosterone, or you are finding you're imbalanced. And again, so one way or another, you're imbalanced. And I don't want to talk about numbers because the number, and if you talk to any sharp or smart functional doc or anybody who's working in the world of hormone replacement therapies, they will tell you that the number doesn't matter.
Spectrum, dude.
It is a spectrum, and it depends on who you are, how you feel, what your symptoms are, how you're testing and whatever. And they'll also tell you, I don't prescribe based on numbers. I prescribe based on the symptoms and if we're improving or not. Now, and then once you've done that for long enough, they can kind of figure out maybe what your sweet spot is.
As you know, right? You put someone up to 500, test that's never been there before, right?
Right.
Let's say their baseline was a little lower at 400, and now they're trying to hump everything, and they have
Right.
no, seriously, they start to have like, you know, they want to go cheat or they want to go do other things. Like it drives behavior. So it's, if you're taking the smallest amount to get the result, why would you go any further,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's where you're, you know,
Yeah.
it's not about this number 750 or, you know, I was 800 here. It's like, no, how do you feel now? And what's going on with your body?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because more is not necessarily better. And while there's not a lot of danger in having a high level of testosterone, there is danger in having low levels of testosterone. And we've talked a little bit about that. You know, just in sort of your health stuff that can lead to depression. It can also lead to heart issues. It leads to low drive just across the board. A couple things. You know, you're mentioning numbers, and we talk about exercise and the importance of give your body the most effective, efficient dose that it needs in order to make change without overdoing it. And again, in the world of supplements and weightlifting or working out or whatever else, and now when we're talking about testosterone, well, then more must be better, right? More is going to be better. Not necessarily. So yeah, in terms of sharing some personal anecdotes, there's a couple things I've found. One is that initially I was going through a really rough, so this is how it came up for me. It's going through a really rough time. So when I say rough, I mean, it was rough for me. That's relative for people. I was building a business. I was working probably 70 to 80 hours a week. And that's not fucking living in my mom's basement and my job, being stressed out about my job as a fucking barista at Starbucks. We were doing some important things. There were financial decisions being made. I was training several clients a week, working on different projects. You know, I was stressed from a work perspective, right? I was combating that stress with exercise. I was working out a lot, like 2 hours a day, but at a very high intensity level. I was probably engaging in some behaviors, I was engaging in some behaviors that I shouldn't have been engaging in, like trying to stay social to stay distracted. And also which led to drinking too much. So it was alcohol kind of intermittently throughout the week and regularly, which was impacting my sleep patterns. You know, working as much as I was working, I was up at 4 a.m., not falling asleep till midnight or later, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, just juggling a lot. And what I started to notice was things were happening. Things were happening in my body. Like one, sex drive was non-existent, like just wasn't there. I was starting to put on body fat, even no matter how hard I worked out and what was going on with my diet. But what ended up happening for me was I started to see some autoimmune stuff start popping up. I started to get hives. I was starting to get these wild rashes. I started to feel temperature issues, like internal body temperature issues. Things were happening. I was like, okay, something's up. Like, and by the way, I was about 37, 38 years old when all this was going on. It's about 10 years ago. Here's the point. The point was, I went to the doctor, and I don't want to get too far into this rabbit hole with the testosterone thing, but I was not addressing my lifestyle, right? Which was I needed to be working less. I needed to be working out less. I needed to be eating more. I was not eating enough. I needed to be eating more protein. I wasn't hitting my protein needs. I certainly wasn't getting enough sleep, if I didn't mention that already. And I needed to be doing things in my life to sort of downregulate the psychological and emotional stress I was going through. By the way, what I didn't mention in there was going through a divorce. So huge, lots of stuff going on. You start piling that stuff on, it piled up. So I go to see an endocrinologist because I'm like, I want to go to the person that deals with hormones and stuff. Like I'm thinking I have an autoimmune thing based on my symptoms. And so I go to this endocrinologist, does tests across the board. He goes, no, you're fine. Your hormones are fine. And this was based on numbers, right? And values. No, your hormones are fine. Like I was barely registering on the testosterone level, by the way. I don't even want to get into that, but he's like, no, you're okay. And I'm like, really? I mean, I'm okay. Like, all right, well, I didn't flag outside of what he considered the normal range. So I was fine there. He goes, you must have an allergy to something. So we're going to put you through all these allergy tests. So I go and I do the pinprick test on the back. Like they do like 50 needles in your back to see if you react to anything. React to anything?
Did you react to everything?
Nothing. I reacted to nothing, right? Meanwhile, I'm still getting these hives and crazy business and whatever else. So that they ruled that out. He's like, well, there must be something then in the supplements that you're taking that's creating this, it's creating this problem. That's where he went to. So interestingly, the doctor went to the supplements, right? He goes, this is your problem. You're taking something and it's impacting you, and that's what's creating this problem. I knew this was wrong. Like, I was like, whoa, dude. Number one, don't tell me I'm normal and I'm fine. I would not fucking be here if I was fine. So secondly, now what I found interesting is he went the same direction like somebody else would go to find the answer. He was telling me that was the problem, right? Long story short, I went through a very long process of going through my own HRT stuff, right? And it initially started out with all being managed by numbers. And when they started, they were giving me not enough. So you were going back to like, you need to offset. Okay, well, your number's here, so we're going to give you this much to get you over the hump. Well, that just fucked me up even worse because all that did was downregulate my production even that much more. The body's like, let's say the number was 300, right? That's what we were trying to get to, and I was at 150. So they're going to be, okay, they're going to give me, 150 on the back end to try to balance me out to 300. That's where we want to get you to. Well, that was just enough to shut down my own production. By the way, supplements will do exactly the same fucking thing, right? So that shut me down. So guess what was happening? My symptoms were getting worse. I'm like, whoa. So then we went the other way. So it's like, well, let me ramp you way the fuck up. Well, so he started to ramp me up, right? And put me at the other end of the spectrum. Now I'm coming back with blood work. It's like registering at like 1,300, on total. And my free is up way up there too. My free testosterone was up there. Bottom line at the end of the day is like, now I'm like, immediately I felt good. Mm-hmm. But over time, what happened is my body's estrogen level, I was aromatizing that shit. And it was so my estrogen was continuing to climb. It was too much for my body to handle. So I went through this whole back and forth. It literally took years to kind of figure this out and get with the right person or the right doctor, physician, to help me through this problem, which was a temporary one. It just wasn't being handled very, very, very appropriately.
It's unfortunate.
It was. It was very unfortunate. So, but the whole time this goes back to the numbers piece. The number doesn't matter. It's how your body is responding, and everybody has their own sweet spot. And so if you're looking for a supplement to do this for you, understand that if you don't understand where you currently are and you are not addressing, I've said it, we've said it so many times, your eat squared plus E, eating real food, adequate micro and macronutrients, right? You're the type of diet that you're eating. Are you eating fucking carnivore? Are you eating vegan? Are you eating anything in between? Like, what you're doing there will absolutely impact all of this, right? So that's important. Whatever you've chosen to do, that shit matters, right? And then what are you doing from your sleep and stress management piece? I already told you I was a total shit show. And then on the exercise piece, I was also a shit show because I was just overdoing it. My body needed less exercise. But until you've addressed all of those things, trying to find a balance to your testosterone through anything other than what I just mentioned, those things, piling on HRT or piling on supplements is probably not going to be very helpful. You know what that endocrinologist never asked me?
Oh, I
What kind of foods do you eat? Do you have any issues with your gut? Not one time. Like,
doesn't surprise me.
Talk to me about your diet. Never asked me about that. Talk to me about your exercise. Never asked me about that. Never asked me about, what was going on in my life, like from a stress perspective, and never asked me about sleep.
Really? Not
any
of
one
that stuff?
fucking question.
Wow.
By the way, this was quote unquote the guy, right? In the Silicon Valley.
I've been to a lot of the guys in Silicon Valley, and I find out the guys are actually
the worst.
I didn't want to give them. I didn't want to say the worst, but like they just weren't the best for me.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to the testosterone thing, it's a super hot question, and people want to say you're low T or they're low T. I must be low T. I need HRT, and it's becoming much more mainstream. It's much easier to get.
You're seeing all the saliva tests online and on Instagram and all that.
And look, it really is. It is easy to get. Before you start going there, trust me, because I've been through my own pathway. Until you address your other shit, this is not going to get better for you. It might make you feel a little bit better, but it isn't a long term.
Getting down to the root.
It's not a good long-term strategy.
You have to mess with everything that also messes with testosterone. It all has to be in balance.
Right, because that's the delicate balance of the human body is like once you start fiddling, for lack of a better term, with one system, it will impact other systems. And if you're not paying attention to those and you don't have a good baseline for what those are, or what that current state is for you, and what you'll never know what normal is supposed to be. So when it comes to testosterone and how important that hormone is, it's important and very important. And if you're feeling some of the symptoms that we mentioned, it could be as a result of that being low for sure, but address it through lifestyle, right? And diet first, and exercise is included in that lifestyle piece, right? You need to be addressing those things there before you get crazy. But that leads us into the next one, which is estrogen, and I already suggested like the estrogen dominance piece. So, I mean, by default, if you're low on testosterone, it makes sense that you would likely be estrogen dominant. This can happen for both males and females.
Unlike me, when I tested, I didn't have either. They were like,
Talk about that.
So I went in and I did my test, and we did the SpectraCell, right? I got some stuff back that I didn't like. My test levels were really low. Estrogen was non-existent. I forget what else was going on. It wasn't
we're going back a couple years.
Yeah, this was about 4 years ago. Dude, COVID's fucked me.
Three years ago?
2018.
Yeah, something like that.
So I did that test and I got with Dr. Bob. And at the time, I was a very lean, ripped individual that had a lot of muscle. So you just looking at me, Dr. Bob was even like, dude, I don't think you have low T, right? I was like, no, trust me, I do. We did the test and it just came back. I didn't have any estrogen. I didn't have any testosterone. Vitamin D was extremely low. Vitamin D, K was low.
How are your Bs?
My vitamin Bs were solid, dude. Minerals were solid. But just looking at it, I was just very depleted in a way where I felt like shit. I looked great, right? But I didn't have any of the bouncing effects. And I never really have for my body, which is, it's nice.
Yeah, so
what do you mean balancing?
So for Scott, when, for my individuality, when I'm not really taking a inhibitor, right? My estrogen doesn't spike. I'm playing the balance game.
Oh,
right?
Got it.
When I'm with Dr. Bob, my blood work and estrogen is everything's chill, and I'm not taking what he's prescribing for like Clomid and et cetera.
I didn't cover that, but part of the issue when I saw the endocrinologist was I saw my testosterone level was like near the bottom. It was almost like, for lack of a better term, it's almost like not registering. It was like a point away from flagging low, right? But my estrogen level was very, very high. So any testosterone that I was producing was aromatizing, right? And aromatizing for those that are listening is basically that it should be. So we use estrogen to make testosterone, right? And if we don't have enough, like we're not going to produce that. And so my body was aromatizing it into, sorry, it's not estrogen. There's just several forms of estrogen, estrol, estradiol, things like that. And so basically those by chemical process, it turns into testosterone. I was not doing that. It was turning it into estrogen. So I was aromatizing. That created a lot of the issues that I was dealing with. And so what we had to do was find an answer to bringing up the estrogen, bringing up the testosterone while also not having that aromatization factor. And there are things that you can use along the way that can help with their anti-aromatase that will help you prevent you from converting into estrogen. I just want to go back to the supplement thing real quick as it relates to estrogen and testosterone. If you are already doing that, if you're already having a problem there and you're putting in a quote unquote testosterone booster, you could be making your situation a lot worse. So again, going back to the balance issue he was alluding to, I did not cover that, but that was part of my issue. And so we had to figure that out. Initially, that's why they made the situation worse. They did it through, by the way, prescribing a cream, like a gel. That was like the worst fucking thing they could have done for me, was give me that, because it's almost, you get like nothing from it. It's basically, it can be described as like taking birth control as a female. Like it gives you just enough to suppress what you would be producing, so that it keeps you from, again, getting pregnant. But in this case, like it was giving me just enough to suppress the very little bit that I was already producing, and it just was a cascading effect. It was a nightmare. So anyway, going back to the estrogen dominance thing, there are things that can lead to estrogen dominance, right? Or low T, that are outside of just not producing enough testosterone. With that, there's environmental factors. We've talked about this before, going back to the foods that we eat and the micronutrients or macronutrients or the lack thereof that are in there. There's like your diet is going to affect this, and you need to address this. So this imbalance will elicit other factors like insulin sensitivity or resistance. Going back to not being able to lose body fat. If you have a high amount of body fat, right, you're less likely to be producing testosterone and more likely to produce estrogen, or that balance be off. So think about this. Maybe this is another way to kind of think about it. Like the body is trying to do kind of the first primary response or thing that your body is supposed to be doing. Like, we take this way back, is it's supposed to survive. So if you're in a position where you are, let's just be honest, you're overweight, you're not active, you are, let's just say, not healthy, your body's going to shut down all the things it should be doing to reproduce, right? Or be active, because it's effectively you're on the backside of you're dying, right? You're useless, right? It's going like, we got to keep you alive. So we don't want you to procreate and reproduce, right? We're shutting down these functions for you. So that's I mean, you could think about it being that way. So if you're overweight and inactive and you have other metabolic disorders, your body's not going to produce a bunch of testosterone, to drive procreation.
Well, so to your point, right? The fatter I am, the more aromatase I'm going to have, right? Because it happens in the fat cells.
Right, correct.
Right, so
something to think about, like you're low T and you want to lose body fat. Well, lose body fat and see what happens to your testosterone. So this goes back to estrogen as well, because there's a fine balance there. Yes. So we've talked about this before, like, and we talked about this in, again, the E-squared, eating real food, and the things that you could be onboarding. If you're not doing that, you could be taking things into the body that could be creating stress on the body and creating a pro-inflammatory response. Which could become chronic, which then is going to impact testosterone and the estrogen balance.
And you're talking about food, right? And when we look at these girls that are doing long-term diets and cuts, right? What happens? They stop having a period,
right?
Their menstrual cycle stops, and that's because they stopped eating fat.
Right. So fats are super important in terms of testosterone production and estrogen production. Yeah. We look at the precursor. I mean, cholesterol really is is the primary driver of that. There are other things that go into that, but you're right in terms of the diet. So the diet's super important. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because we could stay on it for a long time, but you're right. Fat intake is important for hormone production and balance.
So is decreased stress, because if you think about stress and how it's related to other parts, or I guess your endocrine system, as regarding, pancreas and your hypothalamus and then your adrenals as well.
We'll get to cortisol, Cece. We'll get there.
But,
she's
talking
right.
about stress.
We have to downregulate that stuff. Otherwise, your body is not going to want to upregulate your sex hormones. It just isn't going to do that.
Not at all.
So you're playing like this game of tug of war, in that sense. Environmental toxins, things that can be, onboarded through the things that we drink, the things that we eat, the air that we breathe. There's no doubt about it. They impact us. Obviously, you may have more or less control over some of that stuff, but there's things you can be thinking about there. But the chronic or prolonged stress is probably one of the bigger drivers of this. For most people, which then leads, again, a cascading effect of increased body fat, low libido, low energy, depression, all of that stuff. These are things that are going to lead into, these cycles.
Big cascade,
a big cascading effect. So again, if you twist one dial, that's going to impact other things. So just, again, with the hormone stuff, understand what the testosterone and what the estrogen do for you. And it isn't magical, right? It isn't magical at all. And there's a balance there for everybody. And to, offset that, here's some of the things you can do. Number one, exercise. More specifically, lift heavy weights.
Yep.
Like that drives an anabolic process, and it drives the increase in testosterone for males and females. Yep. That's a great way. The other thing is eat real food. We talked about this. Get your adequate micronutrients. Manage that stress and that sleep. But on the exercise piece, like, do more weightlifting.
Lift heavier.
Maybe less cardiovascular work. but not necessarily less in terms of total. Like you can still be doing that, but the intensity of it, that's more of a catabolic type of metabolism versus the anabolic signals that are being sent from the lifting weights. So lift weights. And if you're on a bunch of supplements or a bunch of other things that could be up or down regulating certain things, I would suggest getting off of those. Try and find some normalcy for a while, kind of cycle out of that, and then get your diet right. And the last thing you can do is certainly you can reach out for help. There are people out there that can help you. Now, there are some that do a better job than others. I've just given you my example of how mine started out really rough. This is kind of moving into the world. This is for males and females. The testosterone estrogen balance and why people are going to see their doctors. It's moving into the world of urology. That's probably the next level of where all this stuff goes to, from my understanding. There's money to be made there, right? A lot of money to be made by both pharmaceutical companies and also the doctors. So you want to be careful about that. And kind of where they're bringing you on. The old adage used to be, or the old kind of process is, well, we'll put you on the gel or the cream for a little while. We'll see how that works. And then,
go straight to my butt.
Then you're going to get, you're going to get some options. You can either go pellets or injections, right? And the pellets and injections, I don't want to get into all that, but they both have their pros and cons. But you want to get somebody, if you want to get somebody that wants to see you sort of on a regular basis, particularly right from the beginning. If you're not seeing them every couple of months right from the beginning, then it's a red flag. Yeah. And you want to get somebody that's talking to you about how you're feeling and the symptoms that you're feeling, as well as talk to somebody about all the other things that we just mentioned, which are lifestyle, diet, exercise. Because if you're going to see somebody that doesn't address any of those or respect any of those, you probably got the wrong doctor. They're just going to be managing based on the numbers. And that could be helpful for some, but I think over a long term, it's not a good long-term plan. So think about that. All right, let's move on. Let's move on from sex hormones. Let's get into insulin. People are going to be like, oh, fuck, we got to talk about insulin again. Yeah, because it's probably, outside of the two hormones that we just talked about, it's probably the most important, one of the most important hormones in my mind for you to understand as a human being and what it does. So let's talk about insulin and what it does. Cece, you want to handle this?
So, well, I don't know. Was it fair to repeat what we said earlier in a conversation that we had? So when I think of insulin as the key to unlocking how your body utilizes glucose in the bloodstream. So we have glucose receptors throughout our body, and insulin receptors throughout our entire body, all of our organs. And so that insulin is going to allow our body to process the food that we consume into blood sugar and then allow our organs to utilize that for energy.
Yeah. So if 50% or more of our diet is made up of carbohydrate, right? And that's the majority of the United States of America, right? If we're looking at things, insulin's fucking important, right? If we're putting that much sugar in, right? Or we've covered this on other podcasts. Sugar is not inherently bad. It's the quantity of the sugar that we're putting in and what generally gets onboarded with that sugar a lot of times. What are the additives? What are the other things that come along with it? In the foods that generally contain this processed or additional sugar. But more importantly, it's the total number of calories. Mm-hmm. So all the calories are getting brought on. So if you're constantly putting in too many calories, and within those too many calories comes an excess amount of sugar, that puts a tremendous amount of stress on the system and how that insulin reaction works. That coming from the pancreas, which is the organ that produces and secretes the sugar, or the insulin, right? So what's important to understand is like a strong sensitivity to insulin is extremely important. When I put food into my system, and I don't want to talk just about sugar, I want to talk about food. When I put food in my system, all food demands some type of an insulin response. Mm-hmm. So what we want is a regulated insulin response. So your body recognizes that food is in there. Insulin then gets released. It then it knows where to take those nutrients and shuttle them in order to do the things that they're supposed to do, whether it's to be stored as energy, whether it's to go to the muscle to help rebuild tissue, whether it's to go to the other organs of the body, including the brain, in order to maintain and regulate your neural system, your endocrine system, your immune systems, all of those things. It is, as you articulated before, it's like the key to that unlocks the things that it's supposed
Body's
to go
ability
into.
to use.
Your body's ability to use.
The brain
stuff.
is so strong, it doesn't even want insulin. It's like, dude, I'm dependent.
Right.
Just taking all of it.
Right. Yeah. It's so much of your brain. It runs on sugar.
Yeah.
Right. It runs.
I think what you need 200 grams for basic function a day.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, depends on how basic you are.
Yeah, right.
But
I think 100 for me is good.
But yeah, I mean, so think about that. I mean, think about the all the implications of what that is. So people out there that don't or haven't really, they know somebody that might be diabetic or pre-diabetic or whatever. Let's talk about what happens when we onboard too much food, calories, and we onboard too much sugar chronically. What happens? So basically you're overstressing the system, and because there's already tons of sugar in there, right? So what happens is your body's will start to downregulate the pancreas's response to the sugar that's in the bloodstream. It's like we have so much in here, like I don't have to work as hard, it's already there. But you can see where that would be problematic, because then the keys aren't provided to unlock certain things. Well, if it's not unlocked to take and transport that sugar to where it needs to go, and there's excess sugar, well, your body has to do something with that. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, it'll get stored, or it'll be converted. It'll be converted. If whatever can't be stored as sugar will be converted into a fatty acid, and it will be stored as fat in fat cell. So just look around America. That's what we've got going on chronically right now. It's too many calories, and this is what's happened. And so what happens is, again, you downregulate your body's sensitivity to that insulin, or the insulin response starts to downregulate, and your body is not good at unlocking those things, and now obesity sets in. That sets off a cascade of events, right? There's other things that are going on with the onboarding of too many calories, too much sugar, too much fat, too much protein for that matter, where we start to distress the gut, we start to distress the digestive system, we start to upset the transport system and the utilization system. And then things make it into their bloodstream that shouldn't be into the bloodstream. Our body downregulates things like testosterone. We'll get into cortisol in a minute here. It turns into a shitstorm, right? And we become fat. Our blood cells become, or our blood vessels become hardened. They become blocked. And ultimately we become, as we're becoming overweight, we become unhealthy. So there's heart disease sets in, cardiovascular disease sets in, diabetes sets in. That is the extreme end. But what will also happen from a performance perspective, if we're not managing our insulin, if you're not managing blood sugar in general, everybody knows how that feels, right? I mean, when your blood sugar gets low, how do you feel?
Like shit.
You feel like shit. You feel tired,
clammy,
right? You get the headache, right?
Sometimes you just got to go take a nap.
You have brain fog. You're not functioning. You know what that feels. Everybody knows what that feels like. And if they don't, just don't eat for a day and see how you feel the next day. Like your body needs nutrients. It's starving, right? So, from an insulin regulation perspective, there's a lot of research and there are a lot of studies, like how do we manage this the best? I mean, it's probably one of the more researched things in the medical industry.
And it just keeps getting worse, which is just baffling to me
because
anyways.
We're trying to find the right drug. We're trying to find the right frequency
Dialysis
of that drug.
is a very big money maker.
Right,
why would you want to get rid of that?
We're doing all of that stuff when what it boils down to is proper intake of adequacy of micro and macronutrients and total caloric intake. So if you're not managing your intake of calories and the types of calories that you're taking in, there's a good chance your insulin response will not be what it needs to be. And again, what you don't want is your body downregulating that. That sets off a whole cascade of events. If you would like to increase your insulin sensitivity without medical intervention, here's some things that you could do. Work out, right? Get moving, right? Challenge your body's caloric burning needs or demands, right? So that's this one thing. Said it before, say it again. Lift weights. Those send anabolic muscle building signals, which turn on all kinds of cool shit in your body in order to help you be more healthy and become more insulin sensitive, right? You create a higher demand on the muscles for that sugar, for those calories, for that protein, for that fat to be fueled, during when you're not working out and all those things. So lift weights, exercise, certainly doing some cardiovascular work, very helpful. Just make sure you're not using that as the primary mode or method of exercise. That's one way to do it. What other things are out there?
Eat more
whole
fat.
foods.
Eat whole foods.
Yeah.
I was gonna say pull back from the carbs. Get a little higher fat and higher protein
You
diet.
mean refined carbs, right?
Just in general, I don't.
Vegetables, fruits.
Of course not. I mean, you couldn't overdo those, right? But anything that's really giving an insulin spike, and what I'm talking to is the people that are overeating, and they're like, okay, all of a sudden I have a big issue. Pull back on the carbohydrates, so it just lessens the demand on the body on insulin. It lets the cell kind of desensitize itself again, and you're literally eating protein and a higher fat diet. Now, I'm not telling people to go keto, right? But it's just giving the body time off of carbohydrates so the cellular sites can come back and the cell can now
It's like a sponge.
Yeah, well, it can now respond to less insulin, right? And we can get back to a working, functioning metabolism.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. So it doesn't necessarily have to be forever, but reducing your carbohydrate intake for a period of time can be fine. I never advise that people completely cut out a macronutrient.
No, not at all.
Never.
And like you said, we go through ebbs and flows and periodization, right? When you're in off season, you might have a higher fat diet to bring the hormones back up. And then in off season, it depends what you're doing.
Depends on what the demand is.
Yeah, what is my goal? What am I doing now? How do I provide for that goal down the road, right? Because I'm never in the same spot. So that's what I'm glad that you said that, because diet should never be stuck in one linear aspect, right?
Yeah, you may be cycling things. Cycling calories, cycling carbohydrates is a little bit more of an advanced thing. But for most people, getting started to kind of become more insulin sensitive and starts with reducing body fat and getting more exercise.
Yeah.
So again, a couple of good things: eat real food. Start to reduce the total amount of carbohydrates you may be taking in on a daily basis, or at least, and usually it's too much.
Yeah.
Like, and again, it's not like when I say that, I want to be really specific. If we look at your total macro profile, you're probably under eating
protein,
and you're
fat.
Probably under eating, and your macro
total
profile is probably, let's just say way off. When I say under eating most of the time. There's going to be most of this. There's 7 days in a week. There's 3 or 4 days where you're under eating and 2 or 3 days where you're way overeating, right? And so we need to get that under control. And let's find out how many calories you're eating. Are you meeting your daily need, right? If you're not, like, how do we get there? And what combinations of things do we need to be doing from a macro perspective? And oftentimes that means upping protein intake, and we can back off the carbohydrate intake because we're getting adequate calories. And by the way, your body will convert protein into sugar if it needs it.
If you have body fat on you,
keto and all that stuff, right?
You don't need that many carbs.
Yeah. So there's a reduction on your intake in carbs may be a good thing to do, but you never know until you understand what you're inputting. So that's another thing.
Yeah.
Another thing, start getting some fucking sleep. Like, I guarantee if you've got an insulin sensitivity issue, you're probably not sleeping very well. There are many reasons for that, but it's highly likely you're not sleeping very well. You're feeling stressed out, and that's impacting it. So examine your sleep. Those are basic things that you can start with to start impacting how your body deals with the foods that you're putting in, specifically to your insulin response. So again, a high level on insulin, kind of what it does, how it works, what happens when it's not working right, how to maybe to get around it. And I think everybody could benefit by addressing this stuff. When I say everybody, I mean the majority of the population, as we know through data, can benefit by addressing those very basic things. Last one is cortisol. Cortisol being the one that's like the
demonized
devil,
bad guy, right?
The devil. Yeah, the devil, cortisol. I love talking about cortisol because usually this is the one where the eyes get the biggest when I'm talking to people, like, wait, what? It's the one responsible for stubborn belly fat, right?
It's just the culprit.
Right. It's every time it's the stubborn belly fat one. A lot of supplement companies try to attack cortisol with anti-cortisol supplements and whatever else. But let's talk about cortisol.
What is it?
Yeah, what is it? So it's a hormone that's it's a stress-related hormone, right? Now, I want to preface this by saying stress is good. So for those people listening, go, yeah, I need to de-stress. Yes, you probably do. If you think that, then you probably do. But at the same time, stress is a good thing.
Would a good healthy workout be a stressor to you,
That's
Scott?
a good point. So yes, so there's an appropriate amount of stress, and then there's an inappropriate amount of stress, and that is based on the individual, right? There's not a number to achieve there. There's not a good or bad. It's whatever works the best for you. So there are stress comes in many different forms. There's self-induced stress. Workout would be one of those. There's external stress that I really don't have a lot, I can't do anything about, whether that's weather, whether that's finance.
But it's how you react to it.
Yeah, it's how you react to it, right? Things that happen. So there's those types of stresses as well. There's stress about the things that I put into my body, right? Yeah. So there's things outside my body, there's things inside my body. Food, obviously being one of those. Alcohol, drugs, other medications, SSRIs,
sleep, all of it.
MAO inhibitors, all of those things, they're all going to affect you, right? And particularly with regard to cortisol. What are the good parts about cortisol?
Helps reduce inflammation.
Right. So yeah, cortisol is like your anti-inflammatory
Doesn't it help
hormone.
to regulate your metabolism too?
It does.
Well, it also helps your wake cycle if it's done properly,
Yes.
right?
So yes, so there is a direct correlation. There's a direct interaction between cortisol and your thyroid, right? So we're not going to get into the thyroid today. That's a whole other game. But those guys play together. And when they're playing nicely, things are good. When they're not playing nicely, things are generally bad. But cortisol is a hormone we're chasing during our workouts.
Yes.
It tells the nutrients, macronutrients, kind of where to go, right? At the end of the day, we talk about insulin being the key that unlocks the door. We have the cortisol, which is telling them where to go. So during your workout, it's telling, we need these carbs to get to work, right? In recovery, it's telling we need protein to get to work right now and do what it's supposed to do. We're all chasing cortisol in our workouts. That's the one that makes us feel good, at the end of the day. The challenge with cortisol is if we are continually overstimulating the release of cortisol. And that could be from that's your fight or flight response. So if I'm constantly upregulated with regard to my stress, what's happening on the outside. I mentioned going back, I was working too much. I was working out too much. I had financial issues in my life. I had emotional and psychological issues in my life. I was tapping that cortisol button all day, every day. That's when the problems set in, because when we're constantly basically tapping that button or sending that signal to release cortisol begins to downregulate. Right. And when that happens, then we start to run into a lot of issues. And that's, again, being the anti-inflammatory hormone. If I'm not regulating that inflammation from all the other chronic things that are going on in my life, or the things that have created chronic stress or chronic inflammation, I'm going to wind up in some trouble. So, and hopefully people can understand that cortisol response is really important, but us constantly tapping into that fight or flight, or tapping into chasing the cortisol feeling through workouts, that can be bad.
Yeah. Because what does it do? It breaks down protein to make glucose, right? So we're now breaking muscle tissue down when we're constantly overstimulating this hormone, right? And you can get into extreme fatigue when you're downregulated. There's a whole bunch of hosts that can happen. Secondary hypothyroidism, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other big one about cortisol. Cortisol will suppress your immune system. So this is interesting, especially during the holidays and this time of year, the holiday. So we're just kind of coming in on Thanksgiving while we're recording this today, but the holidays aren't necessarily a positive time for a lot of people, right? It creates a lot of stress for a lot of people. There's a lot of things going on. Finance, right? Finance, people are like, hey, I got to spend money here. I got to do this.
Fucking family, dude.
It gets crazy. You got family. I mean, I think most people can relate to the stresses that come along with it. And you can call it, it's just part of the holidays, but it's fucking stress, right? And people wind up very sick during the holidays. I want to blame it on the weather and the cold and whatever else. And we see this uptick in, flu season and, viral infections and things like that. there's no way to really measure this, but a lot of that likely has to do with people being overstressed, right? And the suppression of the immune system. That's why, like, if you go out, like if you're going, right? And then you take a vacation or you take a couple days off, like you're just like burning the candle at both ends. You take a couple days off and all of a sudden you wind up sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your immune system is just working overtime, right? It's working against cortisol to try to stay up. And then what you do is like all of a sudden you relax, right? You're like, oh, right? You can kind of let the air out and you sit down. Well, then cortisol down regulates a little bit, but your immune system does the same, right? So oftentimes people wind up sick, like right in the beginning, of their downtime or after they've just been going, kind of burning the candle at both ends. A lot of that can likely be attributed to, that immune suppression and your body's immune system being overworked or not being able to upregulate when it needs to, because it's just been downregulated through that cortisol response. So that's another piece of this. There's a couple other things that would make it sound counterintuitive to be like a fan of cortisol that it does. Aside from suppressing the immune system, it increases blood pressure. So again, there can be positives and negatives to that. If you're in your fight or flight response, increased blood pressure is a good thing, right? Send blood, send oxygen, send nutrients to where it needs to go so you can get the fuck away from that tiger that's chasing you. So that's one thing. It reduces bone formation, right? And it inhibits tissue building or anabolic building. Again, people are like going, Wait. You said that was a good thing. That's what we're chasing during our workouts. Yes, to get nutrients where it needs to be for those things to happen. But once that backs off, insulin kicks in, sends the things where it needs to go, and we have a good time, right? And we recover. But if we're chronically overstimulating this, you can see where this becomes an issue. Not gaining muscle, maybe you have too much, maybe your cortisol response is too upregulated. Basically, over time, like significant fluctuations in your cortisol levels throughout the day are normal, right? When you wake up in the morning, right, cortisol goes up, right? It's like, hey, let's get up, let's get moving. Going back to testosterone and estrogen, there's things to be said about vitamin D and the processing of that and what happens in the morning and getting sunlight. And we won't go down that path today, but it goes up. You get up, you feel ready to go. If you're chasing the dragon with 8 cups of coffee because you can't get up and you're just feeling like shit, right when you get out of bed, regardless of how much sleep you get or you've tried to dial in your diet, chances are your cortisol response is off. And what's happened is it's not going the way it's supposed to go. So what it should do is it should go up in the morning. It'll vary throughout the day, and at night it should dip down. If it's not dipping down, you are what we call tired and wired, right? And most people adults have faced that at one point in their life where they know they're exhausted. They've been burning the candle at both ends, going bell to bell, and they're laying there in bed and they're just restless. That could be an indication that your cortisol levels are not operating appropriately. So again, up in the morning, varies throughout the day, spikes a little bit, maybe in the afternoon, and kind of comes down at night.
Afternoon will spike and then dip a little bit at noon.
Yeah, and there's testing and things they can do to kind of look at this stuff, but like if you're going to work out, great way to spike your cortisol, right? And a lot of people do that in the afternoon. And part of that is making sure that you're not doing that too late at night. Sometimes that can really fuck you up. If you're having cortisol issues and you're working, they're not being regulated in the way that we talked about. If you're going to the gym late at night and you're working out late at night, that could be an issue keeping you up at night.
You need a lot of carbs after that workout.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Like what turns off cortisol? Like carbohydrate turns off cortisol. That's, so when you're done working out, let's get the carbs, the protein, the fat in there. Maybe a little less fat than the carbs and the protein.
Insulin in specific downregulates cortisol, right?
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of interplay there. So without confusing people, just understand the importance of that cortisol, the importance of not overstimulating that fight or flight response on a regular basis. So if you're pissed at your girlfriend, you're pissed at your wife, you're pissed at your boyfriend, your husband, or whatever else, and your boss, and then you're not sleeping because it's on your mind and it's the holidays and you're going to your workout and you just need to quote unquote go to church and exercise the demons or whatever else. And so you're stressing yourself there, and, you know, you need to take the edge off. So you have a drink, you know, maybe that one drink turns into two, and, you know, and you're eating and whatever else. Just understand that all that stuff could be negatively impacting your cortisol response. And no matter how much working out you do or how healthy you're eating, may not be helpful.
Yeah.